Pick a container ship at random, anywhere on Earth, and look at who is involved in it. The owner is a company in Hamburg. The flag on the stern is Liberian. The charterer paying for the voyage is in Geneva. The insurer is in London, and the cargo belongs to 1,000 businesses in a dozen countries. Then look at the crew list, 22 people, and the odds are overwhelming that most of them come from one country in Southeast Asia. The world's merchant fleet employs about 2.5 million seafarers, and just 5 countries supply more than half of them. The Philippines, India, China, Russia, and Indonesia. The Philippines alone accounts for around 460,000. First among officers, first among ratings, first overall, a position it has held since 1987. Through 9 presidents, 2 revolutions, and every boom and collapse shipping has produced in 40 years, the answer to the question of who actually sails the world's ships has stayed the same. That is not what a labor market looks like. Labor markets shift. This has the stability of something that was built. Because it was. There is a reason one country crews the world, and it starts with a government department founded in 1974, for the specific purpose of exporting sailors. The easy answer is wages, and it is true as far as it goes. An able seaman on an international ship earns somewhere between $1,800 and $3,200 a month in 2026. In the Philippines, that is several times what most work ashore pays. The gap is the engine. A young Filipino from a province where jobs are scarce can board a ship and become, within a few contracts, the highest earner in the family. But a wage gap explains why Filipinos would want the work. It does not explain why ship owners in Hamburg and Tokyo hire them rather than anyone else from the dozens of countries where the same gap exists. What made the Philippines different was not the price of its labor. It was the apparatus the state built around it. Start in the early 1970s, with 2 crises arriving at once. The first was at sea. Oil prices quadrupled in 1973, and ship owners, suddenly desperate to cut costs anywhere they could, looked hard at their crews. European and Japanese seafaring wages had been climbing for decades, and crewing was among the few major costs an owner could actually do something about. Fuel prices were set by the world. Wages depended on who you hired. The second crisis was in Manila. The Philippine economy was stagnating, unemployment was climbing, and the government of Ferdinand Marcos drew a conclusion few governments had drawn before. If the country could not employ its young workers, it would export them. The 1974 Labor Code made overseas employment official state policy. A National Seaman Board was created specifically to supervise the international recruitment of Filipino crews, and private manning agencies were licensed to deal directly with foreign ship owners, with conditions attached. To keep its permit, an agency was required to deploy at least 50 seafarers, and it was expected to go out and find more ship owners to employ them. That license requirement is the detail that matters. Every agency in the country was, by regulation, a sales force. The state had not merely permitted the export of sailors, it had built a machine that was obliged to grow. The training system behind it was thin at first. The academic literature on the period describes an education infrastructure that struggled for decades to match what ship owners demanded. What the Philippines had from the start was not polish. It was scale, organization, English, and a government treating crew supply as an export industry, while every other country treated it as a job market. One thing had to be true before any of it could work, though. A German owner had to be allowed to hire a Filipino crew at Filipino wages, and under the major national flags of the mid-20th century, he often was not. A ship's registration came as a package in those decades. A vessel flying the British or Norwegian or Japanese flag operated under that country's labor law, its wage scales, its union agreements, and frequently its rules about who could crew it. The escape route already existed, quietly. Panama had been registering foreign-owned ships since the 1920s. Liberia since 1948, open registries, selling flags to owners from anywhere, asking little in return. For decades they were a niche. Then crew costs became the cost that could be cut, and the niche became the industry. Once the flag no longer decided the crew, nationality became a procurement decision, and the market organized itself around the best supplier. Through the 1980s, the arrangement settled into a shape. A ship owned in Germany, registered in Panama, would be crewed through a manning agency in Manila, which recruited, certified, contracted, and deployed the seafarers, and handled everything from medical checks to flights home. The owner never met the crew until they boarded. In many cases, the owner never met them at all, because a management company in Cyprus or Singapore stood in between. By 1987, by its own government's count, the Philippines had become the world's leading supplier of sea-based workers. 4 decades later, the industry's own workforce report still puts it first, among officers, among ratings, and overall. The scale of what grew is easiest to see in the money. Filipino seafarers send home more than $6 billion a year, roughly a fifth of everything the country's overseas workers remit, from a profession that employs around 1% of the national labor force. The remittances build houses, seed small businesses, and sit in the national accounts as one of the country's steadiest sources of foreign currency. In the provinces, seafaring carries a social status it has lost almost everywhere else on Earth. The pipeline that feeds it runs in one direction with remarkable efficiency: academy, agency, ship, remittance, and back again for the next contract. How seriously the industry takes that pipeline is best illustrated by what happened in 2018. Mitsui O.S.K. Lines is one of the largest shipping companies in the world, Japanese, with a history reaching back to 1871. Rather than simply hire Filipino officers through agencies like everyone else, MOL joined with Magsaysay, the country's biggest crewing group, to establish a maritime academy south of Manila, a campus on 13.5 hectares, a 5-story training facility housing full bridge and engine simulators, dormitories, a 4-year degree, and employment on MOL or Magsaysay vessels waiting at the end of it. The plan: around 300 graduates a year. The admission requirements are specific. Filipino citizens, 17 to 21 years old, single. A Japanese shipowner, crewing Japanese-operated vessels, found it worthwhile to help establish a degree-granting institution in a foreign country to secure its own supply of officers. Not a training center. Those had existed for decades. A university, with dormitories whose first graduating class received their diplomas and their ship assignments at the same ceremony. That is what 50 years of this arrangement produces. The relationship between the shipping industry and the Philippines stopped being a labor market a long time ago. It is infrastructure, built, owned, and invested in like any other part of the fleet. But there was always a ceiling in it, and it was not subtle. The academic research on crewing describes the pattern bluntly. For decades, senior officers came from the shipowner's own country. One study found Filipinos filling only 40% of senior officer positions on Japanese ships and 14% on Greek ones, while dominating the ranks below deck. The bridge belonged to the owner's nation. The engine room and the deck belonged to Manila. The ceiling is now colliding with a shortage, and the shortage is winning. The 2026 Seafarer Workforce Report, the 5-yearly census of maritime labor compiled by BIMCO and the International Chamber of Shipping, counts a global shortfall of 39,100 certified officers, alongside a surplus of roughly 57,000 ratings. The world has enough sailors. It is short of people licensed to command them. The gap is widening. By 2030, the report projects the fleet will need almost 114,000 additional officers, which means recruiting around 22,700 new ones every year. Demand for certified seafarers has already risen 35% since 2021, and the fleet keeps growing. You can see what that pressure does in the rankings. Filipinos now stand first not only among ratings but among officers. The tier the research showed was historically held by the ship owner's own nationals. India supplies over 140,000 officers and is rising fast, particularly in engineering. The old hierarchy is being dismantled by arithmetic. There are not enough officers from anywhere to ration the bridge by nationality. And underneath the shortage sits a longer pattern, one the industry has lived through before. The crews on European ships were once European. When the flags of convenience opened the market, the change was astonishingly fast. The International Labor Organization recorded 2,900 Filipino seafarers on European vessels in 1986, and 17,000 by the end of the following year. A 6-fold increase in 12 months, and the crews they replaced came from Europe's traditional maritime nations, which never returned to the work. Japan crewed its own fleet until Japanese wages made that untenable, and Japanese owners now depend on Filipino officers trained in academies they helped build. South Korea appears in the trade literature of the 1980s as an emerging supplier of crews. Within a generation, it had become an emerging builder of ships instead. Its seafarers priced out of the market, its shipyards came to dominate. The pattern is not a neat relay. Poland entered European crewing in the same wave as the Philippines and remains among the top supplier nations today. 4 decades and 1 EU accession later, wage convergence pushes countries out of seafaring slowly and unevenly, not on a schedule. But the direction has only ever run one way. No country, once its economy caught up, has come back to the work, which brings the story to its own tale. The system that put Filipino crews on the world's ships exists because the gap between a Manila wage and a ship's wage was enormous, and a government organized itself to sell across it. 50 years of remittances later, the houses, the businesses, the $6 billion a year. The economy those remittances helped build is the thing that slowly narrows the gap. The crewing system funds its own obsolescence. Every successful contract makes the next generation's decisions slightly harder. For now, the pipeline holds. The wage differential is real. The 2026 report puts the Philippines first in every category, and the shortage is raising pay across the industry. But the business that must find 22,000 new officers a year is recruiting from countries whose alternatives improve annually, and it has already watched two of its greatest suppliers graduate out of the work entirely. The whole arrangement, seen at a distance, is a set of separations. The world runs on a fleet owned in one set of countries, flagged in a second, and crewed from a third, and each separation exists because somebody found it cheaper that way. The flag left the owner's country to escape its taxes and its unions. The crew left the flag because, once nationality became negotiable, labor was bought where labor cost least, from whoever had organized themselves to sell it. The Philippines organized harder than anyone. What looks from the outside like a cultural affinity for the sea is, underneath, 50 years of deliberate machinery, a labor code, a licensing regime that turned every crewing agency into a sales force, academies that foreign ship owners have begun funding themselves, and a state that measures the output in billions of remitted dollars. The people inside that machine are not incidental to your life. The clothes you are wearing, the phone in your hand, the furniture in the room, nearly all of it spent weeks at sea in the care of a crew you will never meet, most likely crewed or commanded by someone from one archipelago in Southeast Asia. Hundreds of thousands of Filipino seafarers are at sea in any given year, 9 months at a stretch, keeping the supply chains you depend on moving. Whether the arrangement survives another 50 years is genuinely unknown. The industry needs 22,000 new officers a year and is short 39,000 today. The countries it recruits from grow richer each year, partly on the wages it pays. Japan's crews left the work a generation ago. Korea's followed. The pattern is slow and uneven, but it has only ever run in one direction, and the Philippines' own success pushes it, gradually, down the same road. Shipping has always solved this problem the same way. Find the next country where the wage gap is wide and the state is willing. What is different now is that it is no longer obvious where that country is. Somebody has to sail the ships. For 40 years, the answer has been the same. Nobody can say what it will be in 20 more.